I built the family ranch from nothing, poured 40 years into the soil, and raised 2 generations under its roof. It wasn't just land, it was life. But after my brother Charlie whispered poison into my kids' ears, they voted me out of my own land trust, claiming I was too old to manage it. They thought I'd walk away quietly. Instead, I rewrote the family legacy, and made Charlie regret every lie he ever told. My name is Richard Allen. I am 72 years old. And until last fall, I was the sole trustee of the Allen Ranch Trust, just over 1,100 acres of cattle land, pine stands, and hardwood forest that my late wife Caroline and I turned into a modest empire. It took decades. Every acre was cleared by our own hands or paid for with backbreaking work. Every fence post, every barn beam, every windmill blade, earned, not inherited. My children, Ellie and Graham, were born on that ranch. Their footprints were in the dirt before they could walk steady. They bottle-fed orphan calves before they knew how to write their names. They grew up chasing sunsets on horseback, chasing dogs through the pasture, building haylofts, and sleeping under quilts stitched by Caroline herself. We raised them right, honest, hard-working, and proud of their roots. But roots can rot. My brother Charlie. He was long gone by the time those roots started growing. The younger wild one, as Mama used to call him. He left for Nashville when he was 19 with nothing but a guitar, a bad attitude, and a pocketful of credit card debt he'd later ask me to help settle. And I did. More than once. Charlie never had much use for dirt or work. But he had charm. The kind that made people smile while he robbed them blind. For years, he was just a voice in the distance, an occasional holiday call, sometimes sober, sometimes not. So when he showed back up after 30 years, gray-haired and grinning, talking about reconnecting with family, I let my guard down. So did Ellie and Graham. I thought maybe he wanted to make peace. Instead, he came to stake a claim. It started small. At first, I was just glad to see my brother showing up for family dinners again. He brought stories and laughter to Sunday evenings. He made Ellie laugh the way she used to as a little girl, and Graham looked at him like he was some kind of folk hero. They'd sit out on the porch for hours, swapping fishing stories and drinking the beer I paid for. He took Graham fishing one morning and came back with a photo of them holding up a 10-pound largemouth. I hadn't even known they'd gone. That stung more than I let on. Charlie started telling stories about the good old days, the kind where he was always the unsung hero, where he claimed he'd helped keep the ranch alive back when I was too focused on the trees to see the forest. The kids soaked it up. They'd heard only my version of our history. Charlie gave them something flashier. Romantic, even. A rebel who could have had it all, if he'd only stayed. Then he started helping Ellie with her finances. You've got to think long-term, he told her, right in front of me at the dinner table. Protect the family assets before the vultures come circling. I laughed at the time. Thought he was just trying to play advisor for attention. But then Ellie began bringing him actual documents, asking him about tax shelters and trust modifications. One evening, she asked if I still had the originals to the ranch trust. Charlie offered to look them over for legal holes. And I, old fool that I was, handed him copies. Not because I trusted him, but because I trusted them. What I didn't know was that Charlie had already registered a shell company under the Allen name. Allen Family Stewardship Holdings LLC. Looked official enough. Harmless, even. But it was built to do one thing, stripped me of every legal foothold I had. It gave the appearance of a family-run succession plan, but behind the curtains, it was all Charlie's doing. And my kids, either too polite or too greedy, didn't look closely enough. One day, I noticed Graham stopped calling me Dad. Started calling me Rich in meetings, like we were distant colleagues. "We're just trying to do what's best for the future of the ranch," he said to me one afternoon, hands folded like he was negotiating a merger. My son, who used to fall asleep in my lap with his boots still on after chores, talking like a stranger. Ellie began arriving at my office with folders and suggestions. She used phrases like succession planning and generational transition, and told me I should consider moving to an emeritus role. Emeritus. As if I was a washed-up professor and not the man who poured his spine into every fence post on that land. I should have seen it sooner. But love is a kind of blindness. Especially when it's aimed at your own children. Then came the meeting. They called it a family vote. Said it would be informal. Just a conversation. I walked into the barn, my barn, where the rafters still had initials carved from when the kids were little. But this wasn't a family gathering. It was a tribunal. Ellie sat with her laptop open. Graham had legal pads stacked in front of him. Charlie was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, smug as a fox in the henhouse. And there were two men at the table I didn't recognize, lawyers in expensive suits. Ellie cleared her throat like she was reading from a press release. "Dad, we're moving forward with restructuring the trust. You'll retain your title, of course, but from here on, management will be overseen by a board, comprised of us and Uncle Charlie." I looked down at the oak table in front of me, the same one where we carved pumpkins every Halloween and did multiplication flashcards on winter mornings. "You're voting me out," I said, quietly. "No," Graham said, shifting in his seat. "We're just updating the structure. For the future." Charlie finally spoke, with that smirk that always preceded a betrayal. "Don't take it personal, brother. It's just good business. You've earned your rest." "Earned my rest." They thought they were being kind. Professional. Like firing a man from the company he built with his bare hands was some kind of retirement party. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just stood. And as I walked toward the barn doors, I kept my spine straight. My boots were heavy, and my hands were shaking, but I made sure not a single one of them saw that. Let them think I was done. Let them think the old man had finally stepped aside. They had no idea what I still owned. Or what I was about to take back. The gravel crunched under my boots as I crossed the yard. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to drop behind the north ridge, casting long shadows across the barn. I paused at the fence line, my hand resting on the top rail, and looked back. They were still in there. Talking. Probably congratulating themselves. Maybe even opening a bottle of that wine Ellie liked to bring up from Austin. They were already writing the next chapter, assuming the old one had ended. But I wasn't done. Not by a long stretch. I climbed into my truck, turned the key, and let the engine hum for a few minutes while I sat still. The same hands that once held Graham steady in the saddle were now gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. The tremble had faded, replaced by something colder. Sharper. Clarity. I didn't drive home. I took the long way through town and kept going until I hit the bank in Abilene. It had been years since I touched the safe deposit box. Caroline was the one who always remembered the key, After she passed, I tucked it into my wallet and forgot about it. Until that night. The clerk handed me the narrow metal tray, and I took it to one of those little privacy booths with the mirrored walls and fake leather chair. I slid it open slow. Inside was the original land deed. Not the trust copy. The real one, with my name on the dotted line and the notary seal from 1984. But that wasn't all. Tucked underneath was the folder from my old attorney. Caroline and I had split the ownership back in '97, quietly, legally, after a bad fire season reminded us that even families can turn desperate when land is at stake. The deed had stayed in the trust. But the water rights? Those were held under a separate LLC in my name alone, Allen Riverway Holdings. My lawyer at the time had insisted it was smart estate planning. Turns out, it was an act of war prevention. Because without those water rights, the ranch was just dust. The cows needed it. The irrigation lines depended on it. The reservoirs ran off the rights I owned. They could take the land on paper, but without the water, they'd be fighting a losing battle from the first dry season. I left the bank with that folder tucked under my arm and a plan taking shape behind my eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, I made quiet moves. No phone calls. No emails. No paper trail that would raise flags. First, I sold the water rights to a holding group out of Houston. Not on the open market, this wasn't about profit. It was about legal distance. The contract was airtight. And the one clause I inserted myself. The group was forbidden, by deed restriction, from leasing water to any entity bearing the Allen Ranch Trust name or any of its derivatives. If they wanted water, they'd have to come through me, or die trying. Second, I paid a visit to a small mineral exploration outfit based out of Lubbock. I'd ignored their letters for years, thinking oil and gas had no place on my land. But now, I was suddenly very interested. I didn't sell. I leased. Long term. The kind of deal that kept them out of the pastures but gave me quiet revenue streams they couldn't trace, because those minerals were also held separately, inherited from my mother before she passed, and never folded into the trust. I sat in silence as the lawyers finalized the paperwork, only nodding when needed. On the surface, everything looked legal. Clean. Quiet. But underneath, I was laying land mines. They wouldn't know until the next board meeting. When they tried to renew grazing permits and the cattle couldn't drink. When Ellie's accountant called her in a panic. When Graham realized the pasture pipelines had run dry and the backup wells were capped. And when they called Charlie, he wouldn't pick up. Because once the land started bleeding money, Charlie would do what he's always done, run. That's the difference between us. He talks about legacy. I built it. The ranch wasn't just dirt and fences. It was memory. Caroline used to say it had a soul. I didn't understand that when I was young. But now I do. You could feel it in the trees near the North Creek, where we planted wild pecans the year Ellie was born. In the guest barn we built by hand one summer, all 4 of us, Caroline handing us lemonade while Graham, still little, got sunburned through his overalls. The front porch had a scratch from when our first dog, Jasper, chased a possum across the wood and tore straight through the screen door. I never fixed that board. Left it jagged on purpose. Even the old bell above the cattle gate, it rang twice on the day we brought Caroline home from the hospital after surgery. Ellie ran out barefoot into the frost to welcome her back. That's the part Charlie never understood. Legacy isn't measured in acres. It's in moments. And scars. And sweat. And the kind of silence that only comes from watching something grow out of nothing, because you loved it enough to never quit. But Charlie didn't see land. He saw a brand. The first thing he changed was the sign. The old Allen Ranch sign had hung at the south entrance for 40 years. Hand-carved oak. Caroline stained it herself. It used to say, Allen Ranch, EST 1984, built with grit, kept with grace. One afternoon, I drove past it and slammed on the brakes. The sign was gone. Replaced with a metal monstrosity with embossed lettering. Allen Agri Solutions, LLC, a family-owned future. A future. Not a past. Not a memory. Just an empty slogan. Charlie told Ellie it was a rebranding initiative. Said the old sign was weather-worn and unprofessional. Said it didn't reflect the direction the ranch was going. When I asked what happened to the original, Graham told me it had been put into storage. I knew that meant the dumpster. Then the house started changing. They swapped out Caroline's kitchen tiles, Spanish clay, hand-laid over a summer with scraped knees and music playing in the background, for polished granite that looked like every other soulless development home in Dallas. Her herb garden, the one she'd tended even during chemo. Paved over for a parking pad for future events. They removed the quilt she'd stitched and hung in the main foyer, a family tree, with every name hand-stitched. Ellie said it didn't match the new interior. Didn't match. Charlie hosted a wine tasting on the ranch lawn. Invited local investors. Walked them through the barn like it was a museum exhibit, pointing at things I built with my bare hands, calling them antique assets. He sold off the antique tractor Graham and I restored one summer in high school. Non-functional, Charlie said. Sentimental clutter. That tractor wasn't clutter. It was Graham's first lesson in real work. We tore it apart for weeks. Bolts, grease, sweat, yelling. When we got it running, Caroline brought out sweet tea and hugged us both like we'd built a rocket to the moon. And now. It was gone. Sold for scrap. That's when I realized, Charlie didn't just want the land. He wanted the erasure of everything I'd built. Because a legacy reminds people of where they came from. And he couldn't afford that. Not if he wanted to convince Ellie and Graham that he was the future, that he was the builder, the visionary, the one holding it all together. He was rewriting the history of this family, starting by burning the footnotes. But I remembered every line. Every crooked nail. Every storm Caroline and I stood through, shoulder to shoulder, hoping the roof would hold. So while they stripped the walls and renamed the gates and paved over Caroline's time patch, I kept working. Quietly. Patiently. Like I always had. Because if Charlie was going to erase me, he better do it fast. Because the moment they realized what I'd done, they were going to need every ounce of water they could beg for. And I wasn't giving them a single drop. The call came on a Tuesday. I was sitting on the back porch of my cabin, sharpening my old pocketknife, the one Graham gave me when he was 12. The blade was worn thin, but it still held an edge, just like me. The phone buzzed 3 times before I picked it up. Caller ID, Ellie. I let it ring once more before I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice was tight. Controlled. But I could hear it unraveling at the edges. Dad, we're having an issue with the water permits. I didn't say anything. They're saying the rights were sold. That Allen Ranch Trust doesn't have access anymore. That someone sold them to a private holding group. I could hear rustling papers in the background. She was panicking. I waited. We thought it was a clerical error, but the contract has your name on it. Now there was silence. The kind of silence you get in a hospital waiting room, just before the diagnosis. I took a slow breath. Then I guess it's not a clerical error. You sold the water rights? I looked out at the hills beyond my fence, dry grass swaying in the breeze. Technically, I sold them 27 days ago. Closed the deal last week. Her voice dropped. Why would you do that? I didn't answer that question. I just asked one of my own. How are the cattle? She hesitated. They're suffering. The backup reservoirs are too shallow. The vet says we need emergency supply lines within the week or we'll start losing them. Then I'd suggest calling your board of directors. Dad. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Graham called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail I didn't bother to check. Then Charlie texted me. You're playing a dangerous game, Rich. Think about your family. I stared at the screen a long time before replying. I did. That evening, they tried to hold a meeting. The staff reported that the pipeline company had halted delivery due to a breach of usage terms. The wells on the south property had dried out. And the mineral lease had triggered exploratory drilling on the northeast corner, rendering 3 pastures unusable for rotation. Charlie tried to call me 4 times. Left voicemails, emails, even sent a guy in a suit to talk. I sent him back with a lemon loaf and a contract clause printed on a napkin. I heard from one of the ranch hands, one who had stayed loyal, that Charlie screamed at Graham in the barn. Said they'd been duped. That I'd planned it from the start. He was half right. I hadn't planned it from the start. I planned it the day they sat me down and tried to replace me like a bad gasket. By the end of the month, Charlie was gone. Slipped away in the night, like he always did when the bills came due. Graham tried to save face, tried to renegotiate with the holding company, but the clause was ironclad. They couldn't even access water without breaching half a dozen environmental compliance laws. And as for Ellie, she emailed me a 6-page letter. It started with, I don't understand how you could do this to us. And ended with, you were supposed to protect the ranch. I read it 3 times. Then I opened the safe, pulled out Caroline's quilt from where I'd folded it all those years ago, and draped it back over the old wooden banister where it used to hang. I whispered to the air, like she was still listening. I did protect it. Because the ranch isn't buildings or bank accounts or brand consultants with clean boots. It's soul. And if I had to scorch the earth to burn out the disease that threatened it, so be it. You don't give your life to something just to watch it get turned into a brochure. Let them pave over their own mistakes. I'll still be here. Water running clean under my feet. And a memory they'll never be able to bury.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.